At first, I thought losing our parents was the worst thing imaginable. Then I learned my brother had taken everything they left behind and blamed me for it. Now I'm fighting to reclaim our legacy. Aftermath of loss. My world ended the day I got the phone call that changed everything. One moment I was wrapping up a normal afternoon at work. The next I was on my knees, phone clutched in a white-knuckled grip, as my younger brother's broken voice delivered the impossible news. Our parents were gone. They had been in a car accident on a highway outside our hometown, and neither of them survived. In a single heart-wrenching instant, my life as I knew it was obliterated. Mom and Dad were dead. I don't even remember the 6-hour drive back to our hometown, only the feeling of my chest caving in. I walked through the front door of the house we grew up in, legs shaking, and the familiar scent of Dad's pipe tobacco and Mom's lavender perfume hit me. They still filled the air, as if Mom and Dad had just stepped out and might return any second. But they wouldn't. I collapsed onto the living room couch, clutching one of Mom's knitted blankets to my chest. My brother Danny sat beside me, eyes red and vacant. We didn't speak. There were no words big enough for this grief. He just put a hand on my shoulder, and we stayed like that, two grown men shattered like little boys who lost their whole world. The next few days passed in a daze of funeral arrangements and paperwork. I tried to help, but I was the older brother who had moved to Phoenix for a job, while Danny had stayed in our Arizona hometown to help with the family hardware store. In the chaos, I leaned on him to handle the details I couldn't face. He coordinated with the funeral home and answered calls from relatives. I was grateful. He seemed so capable in the middle of my numb despair. Guilt gnawed at me that I hadn't been around more. Mom and Dad always told me to chase my dreams, which is why I left. But now I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. I kept thinking, if I'd been here, would things have been different? It's a useless thought, but grief isn't rational. The funeral felt unreal. I stood at the gravesite in a black suit that I don't remember putting on, staring at two coffins. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly, but I felt cold inside. Danny stood beside me, practically holding me up at one point when my knees threatened to buckle. As the pastor spoke kind words about Mom and Dad's generosity and love, I kept flashing back to the last time I saw them alive. It was just a month ago. We had sat on the porch, drinking iced tea. They hugged me so tight when I left, as if they didn't want to let go. I had no idea it would be the last time. After the service, neighbors and family friends approached us one by one, sharing memories of my parents. Dad once opened the hardware store late to help a neighbor fix a broken window. Mom organized charity drives every holiday. Each story made me smile through my tears. I thanked everyone and tried to be gracious, the way my parents raised me. When the house finally emptied out that evening, silence settled like a weight. I wandered into the kitchen and saw two mugs in the sink, Dad's favorite coffee mug and Mom's floral teacup. They must have used them the morning of the accident. The sight of those cups undid me. I sank to the floor, back against the cabinet, and sobbed until I had no tears left. A few minutes later, Danny found me there and slid down beside me in silence. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders and we just sat on that kitchen floor together, staring at nothing. In that raw moment of despair, I believed that at least we still had each other. That tragedy had pulled us closer. I had no idea what heartbreak still lay ahead. Late that night, I found my brother sitting at the dining table with a stack of mail and documents that had piled up. I joined him, and together we started sorting through the aftermath of my parents' lives. That's when I noticed an envelope from the county deed office. Inside was a notice of property transfer for the house. According to the document, a few months ago my parents had deeded the house entirely to Danny. I blinked in confusion, reading it twice. It didn't make sense. Why would they do that without telling me? My first thought was that maybe it was some kind of formality or tax thing. Exhausted and overwhelmed, I set the notice aside. I told myself I would ask Danny about it in the morning, assuring myself there had to be an innocent explanation. At that moment, I still trusted my brother completely. In my wildest dreams, I never imagined this was the first crack in the foundation of everything I believed. I had no idea that an even deeper heartbreak was waiting on the other side of my grief. Update 2. Uncovering the betrayal. The next morning, I approached Danny about the property notice. Over coffee in our parents' kitchen, I slid the paper toward him and asked softly, Why does this say the house was signed over to you? My voice was as calm as I could manage, but inside I felt a twinge of dread. Danny barely glanced at the document. "Oh, that," he said, shrugging. "Mom and Dad wanted to make sure the house stayed in the family. Since you were busy in Phoenix and I was here with them, it was easier to put it in my name. It was just estate planning stuff. They were going to tell you eventually." His tone was almost dismissive. I nodded slowly, but something felt off. My parents hadn't mentioned a word of this to me, and it was unlike them to keep big decisions secret. Still, I tried to quell my unease. Maybe they truly had done some quick planning and hadn't gotten around to telling me. I didn't want to believe anything was wrong, not with my parents' intentions, and certainly not with my brother. Later that day, I decided to visit our family hardware store downtown, partly to feel close to my parents and partly to distract myself from grief. When I walked in, the bell over the door jingled like always, and for a split second I expected to see Dad behind the counter. Instead, I saw a new sign mounted on the wall, under New Management, Owner, Daniel Farrington. My stomach dropped. It was as if someone had punched me. I knew Danny had been effectively running the store lately, but seeing that sign made it feel like he had already claimed it as solely his. I found my brother in the back office, sorting inventory papers. I gestured to the sign, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's with that new owner sign, Danny?" He looked up, more annoyed than anything that I was questioning him. "I put it up to reassure customers that the store will continue running smoothly," he said. "Dad would have wanted people to know it's taken care of." "You listed yourself as the owner," I replied, my throat tight. "Like I'm not even part of this." He frowned. "Come on, Adam. You have your own career. We can't both drop everything for the store. I'm just doing what needs to be done. Don't start worrying about titles and signs." I fell quiet, a mix of confusion and hurt swirling inside me. I left the store soon after, my head pounding. Was I overreacting? Or was my brother actively pushing me out? That evening, our Aunt Linda and Uncle Ray stopped by the house to check on us. We made small talk in the living room until Uncle Ray cleared his throat and said, "We heard some talk, son, about the business having trouble and Danny stepping in to save it. And that your folks, well, left everything to him." Aunt Linda looked at me with worried eyes. I realized they were asking in a polite way why I'd been cut out. My brother had clearly been talking. My heart thumped with anger and embarrassment. "I'm not sure what you heard," I managed, casting a sharp look at Danny. "But nothing's been decided yet. We're still figuring things out." Linda gave a sympathetic nod, but I could tell she sensed the rift forming between us. After they left, the front door barely clicked shut before I rounded on my brother. "Why are you telling people Mom and Dad nearly lost the store, and that you saved it?" I demanded. "They never said anything like that to me. And now our relatives think they left everything to you because of some supposed mess I wasn't here for." My voice was shaking with betrayal. Danny's eyes flashed with irritation. "I told them what they needed to hear so they wouldn't worry," he snapped. "There were issues you didn't know about. I handled it. You are off living your life, Adam. They didn't want to burden you." My hands balled into fists at my sides. "Not burden me? Or not trust me? Danny, I found a copy of their old will today." In a frantic search through Dad's desk after coming home from the store, I had unearthed their last will. They intended for us to share everything equally. Does that sound like parents who wanted you to have it all and shut me out? For a moment, Danny looked startled. He quickly recovered, scoffing. "Plans change. They realized I was the one here running things. You think you're entitled to half of everything just because of some will they wrote ages ago? They changed their minds." "Did they?" I shot back, tears of anger in my eyes. "Or did you change it for them? Did you fill their heads with the idea that I didn't care? That only you could save the business?" My voice cracked, the hurt spilling out. "How could you do that to them? To me?" He stepped forward, and for the first time in my life I saw my brother as a stranger, his face set in a hard, defensive mask. "I did what had to be done," he hissed. "Don't you dare stand there and judge me. You were gone. I was here. I earned this." A cold silence hung between us. I realized then that in his eyes, I truly was an outsider, maybe even an obstacle. My chest ached like I'd been hit. "Mom and Dad would never have wanted us to be at each other's throats like this," I said quietly. Danny snorted and turned away. "Go back to Phoenix, Adam. There's nothing here for you now." His words were like a slap. He headed out the door, letting it slam behind him, leaving me alone in the house we'd grown up in, stunned and shaking. I stood there in the dim light of the living room, an ocean of grief and fury rising inside. In the span of days, I had lost my parents, and now it felt like I'd lost my brother too. Not to death, but to something dark and unfathomable in him. I thought of my parents' integrity, their kindness, and how terribly wrong this all was. Wiping my eyes, I took a shaky breath. If Danny was going to shut me out and tarnish our family's truth, then I would fight back with the only thing I had left, the truth itself. I wasn't sure how yet, but I knew I needed help. Legal help. My brother had turned our family's legacy into a lie, and I couldn't let that stand. I was not going to let him get away with it. Update 3. The fight for justice. I didn't wait long to act. Within days, I reached out to an attorney named Rachel, recommended by a family friend. Sitting in her office, I poured out the whole story. My parents' sudden passing, the transfers of the house and business, and the ugly confrontation with my brother. My voice shook with emotion as I spoke, but Rachel listened patiently, her eyes kind yet sharp with determination. "This is deeply unfair," she said softly when I finished. "Legally, it's a complex situation, but it sounds like your brother might have exerted undue influence on your parents." She explained that if we could prove Danny manipulated our parents or misled them, we had a chance to undo the property transfers and set things right. I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since this nightmare began. We got to work immediately. Rachel helped me file a lawsuit challenging the transfer of the house and business on grounds of fraud and undue influence. Over the next several weeks, we gathered every bit of evidence we could. I gave her the copy of my parents' old will showing their original intentions. We spoke to relatives and family friends. Aunt Linda provided a statement that my parents never indicated any plan to cut me out. On my mother's laptop, I had also discovered an unsent draft of an email addressed to me, dated around that time. In it, Mom mentioned they were juggling some money issues and that Danny was helping, but she reassured me not to worry and wrote, "We'll all sit down and figure it out as a family soon." That email was never sent. Reading it nearly broke my heart, but it showed that my parents intended to include me and were probably planning to tell me everything. Dad's closest friend told us that about a month before the accident, Dad mentioned Danny's solution to some financial trouble but seemed uneasy and said, "Maybe we should tell Adam," before Danny assured him I didn't need to be bothered. And a longtime store clerk recalled overhearing my mother in an argument with Danny at the shop, pleading, "This isn't right. We need to tell him," while Danny insisted, "Trust me, I'm doing what's best." Hearing that clerk's words brought tears to my eyes. It was as if Mom was reaching out to defend me even after her death, confirming that I should have been told the truth. A forensic accountant that Rachel hired combed through the store's financial records. What he found made my blood boil. Months before my parents died, large sums had been moved around under my brother's direction. Danny had convinced them to transfer money into an account he controlled, supposedly to cover the store's expansion loan. But much of that money then vanished into accounts that appeared to be his. Even more damning, we discovered Danny had quietly inquired about selling the hardware store shortly after our parents' death. Despite all his talk of saving the business, he was apparently ready to cash out our family's pride and joy for his own gain. While we built our case, Danny, through his lawyer, fought back hard. He filed responses to the court claiming I was just a greedy son who had abandoned his family. The documents twisted facts, highlighting that I moved away, implying I was uninvolved and didn't care. Seeing those lies in cold print made my stomach churn. One night, I even got a phone call from Danny. Against my better judgment, I answered. He immediately lit into me, his voice seething with fury. "You're really dragging Mom and Dad's name through the mud with this stunt, huh?" he snarled. "They'd be ashamed of you, Adam. All they wanted was for the family to stay intact, and here you are trying to tear it apart for money." His words were like poison. I could barely recognize the person on the other end of the line as my brother. I was so stunned and hurt, I couldn't even respond before he hung up on me. That call broke something in me. I sank onto my bed, crying harder than I had even at the funeral. The person who was supposed to be my last remaining family was now my fiercest enemy, accusing me of betraying our parents when he was the one who did it. The next day when I told Rachel about what he said, She shook her head and gently reminded me not to engage with him directly. "He's trying to get under your skin," she said. "Don't let him. Remember, you're fighting for your parents' legacy and for the truth." Her steadiness helped ground me. I realized she was right. If Danny was resorting to personal attacks and rage, it meant he felt cornered. Still, the stress took a toll. There were days I was so emotionally exhausted I could barely get out of bed. Nights when I lay awake on the couch, I couldn't bear to sleep in my parents' room or even my old bedroom. Those spaces were too full of memories. Staring at the ceiling and pleading silently for Mom or Dad to somehow give me strength. In those dark moments, I remembered how Dad always told us, "Stick to the truth, even when it's hard," and how Mom believed in doing what was right, no matter the personal cost. Those lessons, etched into me since childhood, kept me from collapsing entirely. Finally, the day came for a crucial hearing in our case. I sat at the table in the courtroom, heart hammering, as Rachel presented our evidence and arguments to the judge. My brother sat across the room with his attorney, his face drawn and pale. When I took the stand to speak, I told the truth as plainly as I could, that my parents had always intended for their sons to share in their legacy, that I would have dropped everything to help them if I had known, and that I believed they were misled in their final months. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, speaking these words in front of strangers, with Danny's cold eyes on me, but I felt my parents' presence with me, giving me courage. Our evidence spoke louder than my words. The paper trail of money transfers, the old will, and the testimony from those who had glimpsed the situation all cracked the facade my brother had built. I saw Danny shake his head slightly when the store clerk's account was read aloud, his jaw clenched as if trying to maintain composure. For once, he had nothing to say. After a tense recess where we all waited, the judge returned with a decision. He stated that the evidence strongly suggested possible fraud or undue influence. He granted an injunction to freeze any further changes to the estate and indicated that my case had merit to proceed to a full trial if needed. In plain terms, it was a clear sign that the law was taking my side, or at least acknowledging that my brother's story didn't add up. Walking out of the courthouse into the daylight, I finally allowed myself to breathe again. Under my breath, I whispered, "We're going to be okay," as if speaking to Mom and Dad somewhere above. We hadn't won outright yet, but that moment felt like validation. Rachel smiled at me, that determined, empathetic smile I'd come to rely on. "We're on the right path," she said. I nodded, feeling a spark of relief and gratitude. The truth was coming to light, and for the first time since my parents died, I felt like I wasn't carrying the burden alone. We were going to set things right, whatever it took. Update 4. Justice and Closure. In the weeks after that crucial hearing, a sense of inevitability settled over the whole situation. The evidence we had gathered was so compelling that even Danny's high-priced lawyer must have realized continuing the fight would only bring more trouble for his client. Sure enough, rather than proceeding to a very public trial, Danny agreed to enter settlement talks. I think the prospect of more dirty laundry being aired, and the near certainty of losing in court, finally forced his hand. The settlement negotiations were tense, but mercifully brief. My demands were simple: honor our parents' original wishes. I wanted the family home returned to me, and the business ownership restored to what it should have been. In truth, the old will would have split everything 50-50, but at that point I didn't even care about the money. I cared about the principle and preserving Mom and Dad's legacy the right way. In the end, under pressure from his own lawyer, Danny conceded. I watched him sign the papers, his hand stiff and I noticed trembling. Whether it was anger, shame, or just the sting of defeat that made him shake, I couldn't tell. He transferred the deed of the house back to me and agreed to dissolve the bogus transfer of the business. We decided I would take full ownership of Farrington's Hardware moving forward. I had plans to hire a manager to help run it, since I still had my career in Phoenix, but I wasn't going to let the store leave our family or get sold off to some corporation. That store was part of my parents' soul. Now it would remain a part of their legacy, and I'd make sure it stayed that way. The day the settlement was finalized, I walked out of the lawyer's office with a mix of triumph and heartbreak swirling inside me. Justice, at least in the legal sense, had prevailed. But it didn't feel like a joyful victory. How could it? My parents were still gone. My brother. Well, in a sense, I felt like I had lost him too, long before the ink dried on those documents. He barely looked at me as we sat across the table finalizing papers. At one moment, I mustered the courage to ask quietly, "Why, Danny?" It wasn't an accusation this time, but a genuine, broken question. He didn't respond. He just shook his head, refusing to meet my eyes, and walked away as soon as he could, a defeated slump in his shoulders. I realized I might never get an answer that would make sense of what he'd done. I watched him go, my heart filled with a dull, aching sorrow. Danny left town not long after that day, and we haven't spoken since. In the aftermath, word of the outcome spread through our community and family. People who had initially heard only Danny's version of events slowly learned the truth. Aunt Linda was furious when she found out the full extent of his scheming. She apologized to me over and over for even listening to his side of things. One of Mom's closest friends from church even called me in tears to apologize. She said she'd initially believed the false story that I had abandoned my parents, and she felt awful for ever thinking I was capable of that. I found myself comforting her, assuring her that none of this was her fault. My brother's lies had fooled everyone for a while. Still, hearing her say, "We know the truth now, and we're behind you," brought me a bittersweet sense of relief. My name and my parents' memory were no longer tarnished by Danny's stories. I dove into trying to rebuild both the store's operations and some semblance of a normal life for myself. With Rachel's help, all the legal loose ends were tied up. She had been more than just my attorney. She became a true friend through this ordeal. On her last day in town finalizing paperwork, I took her to the hardware store. We stood outside under the newly repainted sign bearing my father's name, the late afternoon sun casting a gentle glow over us. I had even rehung Dad's framed photograph by the register inside, right back in its old spot. It felt like a piece of him was watching over the place again. "They would be proud of you, Adam," Rachel said softly. I felt tears prick my eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you," I replied and pulled her into a hug. It was an unusual moment for both of us. We'd kept things professional for so long, but it felt right. She laughed as we stepped apart, blinking away a tear of her own. "Take care of yourself, okay?" she said, squeezing my shoulder. "And call me if you ever need anything." I nodded, knowing her words carried meaning beyond just legal help. I watched her drive off, profoundly thankful that in the middle of all this darkness, I'd found an ally like her. That night, I walked through the quiet halls of my parents' house, now my house, and felt both their absence and their presence. Their belongings, their photographs on the walls, all the little traces of their lives were everywhere I looked. I ended up in the living room with a box of old family photo albums. I sat on the floor, flipping through pictures of better days. Mom and Dad smiling on a beach vacation, me and Danny as kids proudly holding up a bike we'd fixed with Dad, Mom kissing us both on our foreheads at our college graduations years apart. A tear slipped down my cheek and splashed onto the glossy page. So much love, so many memories. How did we end up here? In that moment, I wished more than anything I could talk to them one last time, to ask how to heal this rift, how to forgive my own brother for what he'd done. I don't know if my brother will ever truly understand the pain he caused, or if we'll ever speak again. I hope one day we might, but I also know that trust, once shattered, isn't easily rebuilt. For now, all I can do is move forward with integrity, the way my parents raised me. My journey through this has been agonizing, but it taught me a profound lesson about the strength of truth and the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's your own family on the other side. I miss Mom and Dad every single day, but I feel at peace knowing that I honored them in the end. Their legacy of hard work, fairness, and love is safe. As I turn the page on this chapter of my life, I carry them with me, always. In the quiet that follows, I find myself reflecting on everything that's happened. Betrayal left me broken, but it also revealed depths of courage and support I never knew I had. I learned that seeking justice isn't about revenge. It's about honoring the truth and the people we love. There's a wound in my heart where my brother used to be, and maybe time will scar it over, maybe not. But I'm still here, a little wiser, a little stronger, ready to keep living in a way that would make my parents proud. And I know I'm not alone. Their love and lessons live on in me, guiding me forward.